Hello, I'm Joe Corcoran, your new BBC president, elected recently by nearly unanimous vote. It was 50 to 1 or something like that. I thought at first it was my wife that voted against me, but she denies it, so whoever you are, don't worry about it. Come see me later, we'll work it out. Today I'm going to talk, in this our first lecture of the year, about a South African adventure I had a few years back. It included a safari with lots of good birding, and as you can see by the data stamp on the photos, it happened in August of 2003, which was 10 years after apartheid ended in South Africa. So I'll talk a little bit about that. There'll also be a little bit about the work project that I was on, which was quite exciting. In the upper left corner of this slide, you'll see the South African flag. In the middle is a southern white rhino. Again, that's something I'll be talking about a little bit later. So, how did I get to go on such a wonderful adventure? Well, I was a mechanical engineer in my work life, and I got to travel the world to troubleshoot, repair, and train people on complex equipment for natural gas and wind turbines. That travel took me to hotels and cities and towns all over the world. China, India, South America. And from there I ventured out into the local habitats, rainforest, desert, mountains, primarily to bird. It was a pretty good arrangement, so I didn't mind traveling. Otherwise, traveling was not that great. So anyway, there's a nice little write-up about how birding was good for my career in Chip Notes, written by a very famous local author. I'm not going to say his name now, or her name, excuse me, but you'll see if you read the article. Okay, so in this slide, you'll see a lilac-breasted roller, a very beautiful South African bird. In the lower left corner is me as a birder, and in the right corner is me as an engineer with my boss at the time, the Vice President of Marketing. This South Africa trip was particularly good for me. It was a good work trip. It was a big project for our company, an important project, and it was good for my career, and the trip was also good for birding. I got to experience the South African culture, the African people, the Afrikaner people. It was post-apartheid about 10 years, and since I had worked against apartheid, demonstrating and organizing years before, it was nice to see that it finally ended and what it looked like. Plus I got to go on safari, and again, the very best was birding. To show you where I traveled, take a look at this slide. In the lower right corner is a small map of Africa. First off, you can see that Africa is a huge continent. With South Africa is highlighted in the bright red in the southeast corner of the continent against the Indian Ocean. In the blow up above it, you can see KwaZulu-Natal on the east coast, again bordering the Indian Ocean. This is the area where I worked at the mill. It was a paper mill, and visited Zululand, which is in KwaZulu-Natal. The work portion of this trip was a big part of this adventure. It was a $50 million upgrade modernization of an old paper mill near Durban in South Africa. We were under contract for this project, but no one wanted to go. None of the engineers, the field service people, or the shop people wanted to go. They were afraid. It was Africa, the deep, dark continent. Well, I volunteered, and they said, "Joe, it's not your product." I replied, "Well, I'll learn the product, and then I'll go." And I did. It was a trip of a lifetime. It was absolutely awesome. So I want to go over a short description of the paper making process. You start with trees, stripped of leaves, branches, and bark. Then you chip the logs that remain and mix them in a rectifier using chemicals and heat to separate the cellulose fibers of the chipped logs. The mixture is then squashed onto rollers and felt, and the water is drained out, and all little microfibers bind back together to form pulp or paper. So basically, you're taking this wet mash or pulp, moving it down a series of rollers, and drying it in the process to get paper at the end. The goal of this modernization was to take it from a more manual operation of the plant to an automated operation for improved manufacturing efficiency and paper quality. The second part of the adventure was seeing people working together now that apartheid was gone. When I was 7 years old, my two merchant marine uncles talked to me about their trips to South Africa. They said it was a great country because the black people had to walk on one side of the street away from the whites. And if the white people came close to them, they had to walk away. They were not allowed in the same restaurants or facilities or hotels. My uncles thought we needed that in Baltimore. This was in 1963 or so. We actually had it down south at the time. In fact, even in Baltimore at the time, black people had to sit in the back of the bus. They were told to go in the back, even though it was the law that they didn't have to. I remember my parents coming home from a bus ride complaining that they had to sit next to black people. Anyway, as I grew older, I saw how wrong all that was and joined with others to organize and demonstrate against apartheid. So again, it was rewarding to me to see the end of it while I was there. And the final part of the adventure was the safari with birding, or better said, birding with safari. I was more interested in the birds than in the animals. When the guide I was with would point out an elephant, for example, while I was looking at a bird, he would have to wait before I look at that elephant till I was finished seeing the bird. It was absolutely awesome. In the slide, there's a red-billed oxpecker shown in the upper left. Upper right is a Goliath heron, about 4 foot tall. Very big, huge. The middle left is a Eurasian hoopoe. Next to that is the lilac-breasted roller again. Next to that is an African red-eyed bulbul. And to the far right is a Livingstone's Turaco. Lower left animal is a greater kudu. And the zebra is a Burchell's zebra. So when I arrived at the plant, at the paper mill plant, it was a big surprise. The big machines were a mess. There was caked on paper pulp, chemical smell, old pipes and wiring going every which way, foundations cracking. It was dark, dreary, and holes everywhere. It was just a big, big mess, and I'm thinking, this is going to be one heck of a job, and it's going to take a lot of work to do this modernization. There were people everywhere, up in the rafters, up on the sides, over in the corners, just everywhere. Normally the plant had an operating crew of 100 people, but they brought in 1,000 people in for this project with a 2-week deadline to do the upgrade. They had months of planning ahead of time to plan, so everything was on a strict schedule with crews constantly coming in and out, wearing different color hats representing different companies or rank. All over the place. It was chaos in there, it seemed to me. The crews were quite diverse, with people from India, Japan, Sweden, Netherlands, Great Britain, Germany, France, and of course South Africa. Brown, yellow, black, white people. Again, people everywhere doing their part of the upgrade. On the left, you'll see the people in the rafters that I mentioned. We'd be walking around, hear some noise, look up, and there was somebody working. On the right shows a man running a jackhammer inside the mill. There's paper dust and cement dust in the air. It's noisy, it's full of fumes. It was a difficult atmosphere to work in. But we did eventually get the new upgraded motors installed, and the project was finished and done well. You can see my crew installing the power transmission coupling that my company supplied. And you can see the multiracial crew, practically unheard of in apartheid days. And what a lovely crew it was. Representing different cultures, 2 different tribes, one Zulu, the other Xhosa, a Frenchman, an Englishman, and 2 Afrikaners. Our crew spent the evenings in a nice hotel nearby. The European guys loved to stay up late, drinking Coke and brandy, which was their favorite drink. and smoking cigarettes and cooking on the braai. The braai is a South African version of a grill, where you put everything on it. Your bread, your vegetables, your meats, a variety of meats, and you have to use wood, specifically some South African wood, for the fire. So one evening, we were up late discussing politics. I was with the guy in the lower left corner when he advised me about 3 a.m. that we had to leave at 5:30 a.m. for the site. And I said, oh my God. We had drunk a lot of Coke and brandy. He was cool, but I was not. And I was thinking, it's not going to be good. So I woke up a couple hours later with a terrible hangover. And to make matters worse, when we got to the plant, we found out that they were doing random breathalyzer tests. And they pulled me out of the line for one of the tests. I said, uh-oh, this is it. End of my career. I just blew this trip. Well, I don't know what happened. Maybe it was a miracle, but I passed. I don't know how I passed. Maybe because I was white. Maybe because the legal limit in South Africa is like 10 times what it is in the States. I don't know. I felt better. Especially I did rest before I worked. I didn't go into work like that. And then things worked out quite well. The project would have been done on time, except for a problem getting parts. We could not get the special bolts we needed. It turned out that the holdup was in customs. The customs office had been broken into and all the computers stolen. They were trying to do everything by hand until they could get a new computer system up, so that meant I had an extra 3 or 4 days in South Africa. What do I do? Well, with a weekend that I had already planned, I put those 3 days with those 2 days, and I had a nice little 5-day safari to work on. And I planned it, and man, that was a good choice, just let me say. The part of South Africa I was in was mostly dry grasslands, bushveld. Veld comes from the Afrikaans word for field, V-E-L-D. The bushveld has large bushes but is very dry. Here's a representative of the terrain in the 3 main photos. It's sort of like the Great Plains of North America, but hilly. Some of the birds there were spotted green pigeon, or actually emerald spotted wood dove, in the lower left corner, and southern cordon bleu in the lower right corner. Here's a close-up of the veld. It's dry and it's thorny. You can see there is some creature there in this slide, but it's very well hidden. I'm not sure what it is anymore. I suspect it's a baboon, but I'm not certain. Welcome to the veld. It can hide a lot of animals, and there are a lot of animals to hide in the South Africa veld. Here we have some impala, my favorite antelope. So graceful, so quick, and can jump so high. Very cool antelope. And although there are some similarities in appearance, antelope are not in the deer family. I don't think they have any deer in South Africa or in Africa. One of the main differences between deer and antelope is that deer have antlers, which fall off every year. So they grow new antlers every year and they fall off every year. Moose and elk are both in the deer family and both have antlers that fall off every year. Antelope have horns which grow continuously. We only have one antelope in the United States, and that's the pronghorn antelope, which is very quick and very fast, and it's believed that they evolved when they were much faster cats than we now have in North America. Both the pronghorn and the impala are very quick, very fast, and very graceful. Here's a nice shot of 2 zebras at a watering hole. Note that they're staying away from the deep water, and that is because crocodiles. The sign on the upper right, Danger Crocodiles, was actually in a lake near one of the places where we were staying. The story goes that a couple on honeymoon went out for a midnight swim and never came back. That's when the sign was put up. Too late for them, I guess. To the left of that is a single zebra at the watering hole. On the lower right is a zebra leaving and a nyala bowing away, giving deference to the zebra before it takes its turn at the watering hole. Birds seen at this location include a yellow-billed stork, lower left, and next to that, an African wattled lapwing. The bottom left is a headshot of a zebra. I actually did get quite close to the zebra. The guide said it's okay to get close there as long as it doesn't look like he's spooked or he's ready to run. But don't get too close to the back end. They can kick really, really hard. To the right of that is a warthog. They have extremely sharp tusks, like our wild boars, and they can really do some damage, like cut open big arteries, and people have been known to bleed to death when attacked by them. Warthogs, unlike our pigs, have really long legs to be able to outrun the cats. They are quite fast. Above that, the birds seen here include, on the top right, a white-fronted bee-eater. Fronted means forehead. I just found that out in the last year or two. So, for example, a lilac-fronted parrot would be a parrot with a lilac-colored forehead. Next to that, to the left, is a cardinal woodpecker. And then to the far left, on the top, is a four-colored bushshrike in its natural thorny habitat, as you would expect for a shrike. Here are giraffes in the thorny bushveld. They actually use their long black tongues to get to the leaves, or what you call leaves, up high, but it's really quite dry. And they use those thick black tongues to wrap around and pull the vegetation away from the stems. My favorite giraffe picture. All these giraffes are Cape giraffes. We ran into a herd of Cape buffalo. Cape buffalo is one of the more dangerous animals, one of the big five in Africa. Again, don't get too close. Here is a greater kudu, male, in the upper left and the lower right corner. We had seen a female in the slide earlier. Along with an African crowned eagle on the upper right. A greenbacked Cameroptera on the lower left, and in the lower middle, a zitting cisticola. Again, we saw lots of birds. Birding first, animals second. We also came upon a small herd of blue wildebeest, seen in the upper left and the lower right corners, and also some more nice birds. Lower left is a hurricane thrush. Next to that, again, a red-billed oxpecker. That's the one that gets on the animals, rhinos typically, and others, to pick off insects. And the animals allow them to do it because it helps them to keep groomed. The upper right looks like an eastern or western meadowlark, but it's actually a yellow-throated longclaw, related to the pipit family. Look at the claws closely, the toes and claws. They are very long. In the upper left, we have a male ostrich checking out a small herd of waterbuck. In the lower right, we have a female ostrich. Male ostrich feathers are black, which is good for when they sit on the eggs at night. Females are brown colored and sit on the eggs during the day. It's good camouflage. A female can lay 40 to 50 eggs in a season. And the eggs are laid in a communal nest. The dominant female will lay 7 to 10 eggs in the center, and the other females will lay eggs around that. Then different males will take turns sitting on the nest at night, and females take turns sitting on the nest during the day. An ostrich egg weighs about 3 pounds and has volume enough to contain 24 or 2 dozen chicken eggs. Other birds seen here are scimitar bill or common scimitar bill in the middle, top middle, and a red-winged starling to the right of that. It's a relative of our starling, of course. In the lower left corner is a trumpeter hornbill. Some of the hornbills have the unusual nesting behavior in that after the birds mate, the female goes into a nest hole which is sealed up with mud, and she stays inside there with only a small opening to the outside from which the male will first bring her nesting material to build the nest and then later bring in food and take out waste. This will go on until the eggs are hatched and the young are old enough to fledge, at which point the chamber seal is broken down, and then the chicks can leave. Here's a female ostrich. You can see that she would blend in pretty well if she sits down in this grassland. They are pretty fast and can run 40 to 45 miles per hour and can outrun most cats. And if anything gets close, they have some dagger-like toes that they can use as weapons. They have 2 toes on each foot that can gut many of the cats if they get too close. Very sharp and very strong. They can kick really well also. Here's a classic South Africa bushveld scene. A southern white rhino resting in the shade under an acacia tree. This was kind of a scary moment for me. I was facing a rhino that looked like it might have intentions of charging. I wasn't quite sure. I was in a small car that I had rented and I was alone. And I had a camera with me that I had remembered to get from our R&D department, one of the first digital cameras, and it was a really good camera. I'm glad I remembered to get that. I really didn't need it for my job, but that's not what I told them, of course. I was trying to figure out how to use it because I wanted to take a picture of this rhino before it moved away or charge, and I had to get out of there. I just couldn't figure out how to use the camera. Cell phones were relatively new back then, and I had one, and I used it to call a colleague in the States. With the 8 hours time difference, it was about 2 or 3 in the morning for him. When he answered, he goes, "Joe, I thought you were in Africa." I said, "Yeah, I am." I said, "I need you to tell me how to use this camera because I'm looking at a rhinoceros and I want to take a picture." And he's like, still sleepy. He goes, "Oh my God, Joe, what the heck?" Anyway, he went through it with me. Thank you, Michael. And I was able to get a photo of the rhino. As it turns out, the rhino was on edge because it was a mother. There's a growing cub behind it. I took this photo after I drove past and was looking back and saw that she was more relaxed. Now there's about 18,000 southern white rhino in the area around southern Africa. Southern white rhino are a subspecies of the white rhino. Northern white rhino don't exist anymore. There were 2 females left in 2018, and I think both of them have died. They also are a subspecies of the white rhino. Anyway, the southern white rhino did have a population of about 50 to 200 back in 1900. They were nearly exterminated. And through conservation efforts, they've been brought back to their population of 18,000, which is still not enough to keep the population going. There are still lots of pressure, especially from poachers. Poachers go after the rhino horns. The rhino horns are used in the Far East in places like Vietnam and China for medicinal purposes. They're ground and shaved and put in potions and soups to supposedly cure things like common cold or other ailments. However, the material of the horn is nothing more than keratin, the same thing that's in your hair, the same thing that's in your fingernails. So it's doubtful that it actually does have any curative properties. So what happens though is, because of the protections and because of the demand for the rhino horn and rhino horn material, hunting the rhinos for their horn has become very lucrative, especially for poor people who might live in the area. So as the rhino population declines, or as it's harder and harder to get the horns, the price goes up, making it even more desirable to go after a rhino horn. Many of the national parks have even gone to the extent of cutting off the rhino horns of the live rhinos. It doesn't hurt them, just so the poachers won't go after them. However, what happens is when the poachers hunt the rhino, and they spend a lot of time and energy hunting them, and they hunt down one without a horn, they kill it anyway because they don't want to have to hunt that same one again and waste the energy. So it's a very, very difficult situation. It's a real mess. So the rhinos are in trouble, and so keep that in mind in your giving for environmental causes. This is a troop of chacma or Cape baboons. The male in the dead center is being groomed by the female. Must be nice. In the lower right corner is a vervet monkey, V-E-R-V-E-T, fairly common around people. They steal food. Watch out. In Indonesia, I was on a boardwalk one time, and a pack of monkeys would not let me and two other people pass until we gave them food. They kept baring their teeth and threatening until we did. Monkeys can be quite mean. Here's how the upper crust, or the upper couple percent, live in South Africa. Nice large properties, gated, fenced. This one is on the Indian Ocean. Beautiful, beautiful. By the way, only one more ocean to go for me. That would be the Arctic. Plenty of barbed and razor wire to go around. And look at the very sharp spike knives on the left wall. Very, very much security. Very much fear. Even more security. On the door in this wall, it says, "Beware of the dog," or in Afrikaans, "Pas op vir die hound." Nice Germanic Dutch. The door is bolted with the lock. Then you see warning, Chubb, that must be the security agency. Armed response. A telephone number, and trespassers will be prosecuted. The message is clear. Stay away. Enough about the South Africa rich. Here's a beautiful young male African elephant. Gorgeous, gorgeous creature. There were actually two of them. You see them grabbing each other's tusks and pushing against each other, sparring like brothers, practicing for later on when they're adults. But then it got serious. They decided to charge each other. You could hear the rumble as they charged. Then, boom, they crashed together. They both looked rather stunned after the crash, and they'd had enough. The one on the right acted like he had a headache. Here we're in the midst of kind of a scary situation on one of the few roads in St. Lucia National Park. There are two males in front of us, different ones than we'd seen before. I was with the guide at this point in the passenger side of the car. Now before I go into the story, let me tell you what the guide said when I asked him earlier how you know whether they're males and not females. He said, well, you can't go by the tusks. Both males and females have tusks. If it's two males, you usually go by their behavior. If it's a single male, what you do is you wait until it's occupied eating and go up behind it very, very carefully and lift the tail very gently. If it's a male, you'll know it, and you'll never forget what you see, if it is. That's a joke. Anyway, back to the story. The guide stopped here, and I asked him why he stopped, because I thought he was just going to go around after we had observed the males for a little bit. He said he noticed that there were other elephants around, behind us and on either side, that we were in the midst of a herd. And he was also concerned because he saw a young elephant, very young elephant, knowing that there was a young elephant's mom around. He had heard 2 days before that a car was flipped by an angry elephant. So he was very invisibly scared and frightened, which of course made me visibly scared and frightened, I'm sure. He asked me to just sit and be quiet. And that's exactly what I did and what we did until they moved on. And once they moved on, we remained in an unflipped car. One of the many highlights for me on the trip was a 14-mile on-foot birding trip through Zulu land. The Zulu people in this area were basically goat and cattle herders. You can see here some of the grasslands that they occupy. You can also see some cattle egret. The goal of this Zululand trip was to find a semi-rare Pell's fishing owl, an owl that hunts fish at night, typically. And to do that, we had a Zulu guide who knew where it was, a college-educated naturalist, Mpendolo, I believe his name was, who led us through the Zulu territory to find the owl. And we did, accidentally as it turned out. We first went to the place it normally inhabits, about 7 miles in, but couldn't find it. And then about a mile on the way back out, somehow, the guide saw this bird in the clutter in the trees, and it was beautiful. It was unexpected where we found it, unexpected even to him, the guide, but we got it. You see in the upper right is my very first ever digiscope, where I put the digital camera up to the scope and got not the best, but a serviceable digiphoto of a Pell's fishing owl. Here are some of the Zulu people. There's a group of women and children on the left out foraging, probably for roots, maybe water, I'm not sure. Notice that the small child doesn't have shoes. In fact, all of the children out on the grassland in the Zulu country did not have shoes. In the upper right is a Zulu boy with a homemade toy. It's actually a stick connected to a wire frame car with wheels made out of the end of the rolls of packing tape. Quite ingenious. I'm sure his mother or father made it for him, or maybe he made it himself. Anyway, when you don't have wealth, you make do with what you have. I was in the car with the two guides, the Afrikaner guide, main guide, and then the Zulu guide, when these Zulu boys came up to the car as we were out driving slowly. My guide asked them to smile for the camera so I could take their picture. Apparently there's no Zulu word for smile, The Zulu guide asked them to show their teeth. And here they are, showing their teeth. Beautiful boys. And note the clothing. If you've ever donated clothing to the large bins in the parking lot of malls for international distribution, well, this is one of the places where the clothes go. So it's a good thing. Show your teeth. There's a herd in the background here, a herd of cattle. The man in the foreground is in a wet area, muddy area, where he's hunting. He's hunting in the mud. And this is what they were hunting for: large African catfish and walking catfish. Specifically, sharp-toothed walking catfish and African catfish. These catfish can breathe air with their gills and can live for days without water. The walking catfish can, of course, walk from mud hole to mud hole. These boys had quite a catch. Here are some Zulu huts. In the lower right is their traditional hut, thatched roof, sticks making up the walls, called an indlu, I-N-D-L-U. In the upper left is a more modern hut, which is made of brick and mortar for the walls and with roofing made out of modern roofing material, but a similar design. The lower left is a modern Zulu hut under construction. In this area, we saw a spectacled weaver. Weavers are birds that weave elaborate nests, typically in large colonial communities, through which snakes love to venture, of course. And the weavers are actually related to Old World sparrows, of which one is our house sparrow. And the final slide in this adventure depiction is the main guide, Richard White, hell of a name in post-apartheid South Africa, giving candy to one of the Zulu children. He was a very, very nice guy and supported the end of apartheid. He thought that a lot of the reporting about how terrible the conditions were after apartheid ended were exaggerated to some degree, although some of it about safety, etc., was truly admitted. Anyway, before I end the presentation, I want to leave you with one story that happened. A little adventure story, I guess. The night before this last day, we spent the night in the lodge, and we were sitting around when the sun went down and wondering what to do. And one gentleman came in and said, "Let's go look for some leopards." I said, "Okay, let's go look for some leopards." I figured we'd drive off into the park, into the national park, and look around from the car. That's not what he meant. He gave me a flashlight, and he walked outside, and we were looking up in the trees in his neighborhood for leopards. Apparently, leopards frequent the neighborhood, hunting for antelope that are around, which I'll tell you about in a minute, and maybe even small dogs and cats. I didn't see any around. But there were plenty of other animals as we wandered around his neighborhood. There were herds of antelope. There was a large hippo group. I had heard that the landowners complained about elephants running across their property. St. Lucia was just a nice little middle-class enclave, but it was special in that apparently wild animals roamed through it, especially at night. I wouldn't want my child living there with the leopards about, but I don't know that there were any children there anyway. So, as far as the leopard, I have one in the photo here, but we actually did not see one. When you're together, they'll leave you alone. At least that's what they told me. And I guess in a way, I'm glad we didn't see any that night. So that's it for the presentation. Thank you very much.